Hey guys, tonight we step softly into Versailles, not as hurried tourists, but as quiet wanderers slipping through a palace wrapped in moonlight. You can almost hear your footsteps echo across polished marble floors, while candles glow faintly, throwing reflections that stretch like whispers along the gilded walls. History breathes slowly here, like an old cat that refuses to move from its warm chair. Honestly, if these walls could talk, you probably would not survive the amount of gossip they hold. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please, let me know in the comments where you are listening from, and what time it is for you right now. I always love picturing our little circle spread across the world, connected through these late-night stories. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your steps drift forward with no urgency, each movement carrying the same gentle rhythm as someone strolling through a quiet garden at twilight. There is no push, no pull, only the calm unfolding of the moment as it allows you to simply exist within it. Stone walls flank your path, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of passing hands. A tapestry of touches left behind like invisible brushstrokes. The air here feels different from the ordinary night outside. It is thicker, scented almost imperceptibly with the lingering perfumes of ceremonies and gatherings that once defined this place. Versailles is not just a palace of stone and glass. It is an echo chamber, humming softly with the lives once lived in silken layers. You half expect the floor beneath your feet to creak with memory, to whisper something of the stories it has carried. Instead, it stays politely quiet, perhaps sensing your wish for peace tonight. As you move deeper into the courtyard, shadows unravel and spill across the gravel paths, stretching long and thin, like velvet ribbons lazily tossed to the ground. The moon, in its casual generosity, slides across the gilded gates and makes them shimmer as though eager to be noticed. For a moment you laugh inside, realizing that even metal, when polished and proud, can behave like a flirt at a candlelit dinner. The air holds a warmth, but not the heavy kind that sticks and sweats. This warmth drapes itself over you like a soft blanket fresh from the dryer, coaxing your shoulders to unclench, your jaw to ease, your pace to slow even further. You might even chuckle at the thought that Versailles feels like the original five-star spa retreat, complete with moonlight therapy and silence for deep relaxation. The façade of Versailles rises ahead, ornate and symmetrical, the embodiment of grandeur. At first glance it might intimidate, standing tall in its perfection. Yet the longer you gaze, the less imposing it becomes. The palace seems to lean, ever so slightly, as if curious about you. Not challenging, not cold, but inquisitive, like a host tilting their head with a gentle smile. Behind those countless windows once lived the watchful eyes of queens, mistresses, and courtiers, each carrying secrets fragile as glass baubles hidden in drawers. But tonight, none of that matters. Tonight holds no trace of politics, no tangled intrigues, no whispered gossip, only the pure stillness of walls and shadows keeping their quiet promises. Tonight the building is simply a companion, grand in presence but tender in spirit, inviting you to walk slower, to breathe deeper, to let your mind rest. Every golden detail on the façade tries eagerly to catch your attention, flashing under the night sky like jewelry that insists on being admired. But you know better now. You allow the shine to blur softly in your vision. You refuse to chase every sparkle. Instead, you find steadiness in your breath. A soft inhale, a slower exhale, and the palace responds with its own steady silence. In the quiet that wraps itself around you, it becomes clear that history is not always a loud voice echoing through time. More often, it lingers softly, humming like a tune half remembered, yet deeply familiar. It drifts through marble corridors, glides across polished brass, and floats gently in the air. A lullaby, woven not to startle but to comfort, reminding you that even the past knows how to rest. At the threshold, the main doors await, vast and heavy, yet not unkind. They creak open in a tone that sounds more like an old friend sighing than a barrier protesting. You imagine the countless hands that have pushed these doors. Kings returning from hunts, visiting nobles rehearsing flattering speeches, soldiers rushing in with messages, perhaps even a servant sneaking through with a tray of fruit left forgotten. Tonight, however, it is only you, and the doors seem to welcome your solitary step. You grin at the thought that Versailles is offering you a private tour, a generous gesture from a palace that once demanded fortunes simply to let its chandeliers sparkle above admiring crowds. Inside, the air shifts, carrying with it the scent of aged wood and the faint sweetness of wax polish. It clings gently, like a memory you cannot quite place but recognize nonetheless. The feeling is oddly comforting, not unlike stepping into a grandmother's attic, minus the mothballs, plus about 700 mirrors. Your shoes make no sound here. The palace seems to have rolled out a cushion of silence just for you. Yet this silence is not hollow. It feels full, the way silence feels when you sit beside someone you love, and there is no need for words. Candlelight bends lazily along the hallway, its glow not rushing to illuminate, but swaying in a casual dance. Each flame wavers as though it has grown weary of performing grandeur and simply wishes to relax. You find yourself smiling again, amused that fire itself could display such personality. The light softens the ornate edges, turning sharp carvings into gentle ripples, warming stone that might otherwise appear cold. You think, almost with surprise, that even marble can look cozy when wrapped in the right light. And as you stand there, bathed in this gentle glow, you understand that Versailles, for all its might, has chosen tonight to be kind, to be quiet, and to be your silent companion. You step forward, leaving the hush of Versailles courtyard behind, and cross the threshold into its most dazzling heart, the Hall of Mirrors. Even knowing its reputation, even preparing yourself for the grandeur, your breath falters at the first glimpse. This is not merely a hallway. It is a river of light suspended within stone. Completed in 1684, under the vision of Louis XIV, the Sun King, this gallery was designed to reflect not just faces, but power, wealth, and an entire age's devotion to magnificence. Yet tonight, under the wavering glow of candles, the hall feels less like political theater and more like a cathedral built for silence and memory. The sheer length is astonishing. More than 70 meters stretch before you, lined with gilded arches and crystal chandeliers, each droplet of glass trembling faintly as though aware of being watched. To one side, tall windows reveal moonlit gardens where fountains lie still, their waters silvered under the night sky. To the other, identical mirrors return the vision, doubling the dream until boundaries dissolve. Outside and inside blur together, and for a moment you wonder if you are walking through Versailles or through an illusion carefully crafted to enchant. Your footsteps echo softly on marble, each sound absorbed by the velvet hush. Instinctively, you slow your pace. To hurry here would be sacrilege, like skipping verses in a sacred hymn. So you walk in time with the flames, steady and unhurried, each step seeming to belong to ghosts. A diplomat with sealed letters, a courtier whispering intrigue, a maid balancing crystal. For centuries, this was a theater of politics. Here, ambassadors bent knees and kings made declarations that would tilt Europe's fate. And yet tonight, those echoes of power are strangely muted. In their place, you sense something more delicate, almost playful. The residue of laughter from masked balls, the rustle of silk skirts, the faint perfume of a duchess long vanished. Versailles does not let go of its memories easily. Instead, it traps them in the folds of fabric, in the gilt of cornices, and most curiously, in its mirrors. You step closer to one of the great panels. At first, You expect only to see your reflection, stretched and multiplied under golden frames. But then your eyes catch something else. A scratch, a line, another, faint but deliberate. At first they look like accidents of time, yet as you angle your face to the glass, you begin to recognize them as letters, names, initials, little marks of presence, carved by hands now dust. Centuries ago, when guests crowded this gallery, some could not resist leaving behind proof that they had been here. Perhaps they thought no one would notice. Perhaps they hoped someone would. There is something quietly startling about these faint inscriptions. They shrink the vastness of Versailles, the glory of the Sun King, the majesty of treaties signed here into the gesture of a single restless hand. You can almost see it, a noble leaning idly against the glass during a pause in music, carving initials with a jeweled ring. Or perhaps a young woman, heart quickened, tracing the first letter of her lover's name into the mirror, as if the act might preserve her secret forever. The Hall of Mirrors, created to amplify magnificence, became almost by accident a diary of private longing. You lift your hand near the glass, not touching, but hovering in reverence. These scratches have survived revolutions, occupations, and centuries. Candlelight slides across them like whispers caught in silver. They remind you that history often endures not through proclamations, but through the fragile scars left quietly in its margins. Above you, chandeliers tremble in the draught, their crystals chiming softly, like laughter too delicate to catch. With each step, the hall shifts its mood, at one glance endless, a corridor of reflections stretching toward infinity. At another, an intimate chamber urging you to pause and notice its smallest flaws. Versailles, for all its majesty, insists on remaining human. You picture June 28, 1919, the Treaty of Versailles inked upon these very tables. Pens scratched, cameras flashed, history fixed itself into official memory. Yet you imagine the mirrors watching in silence, recording not only leaders stiff in their collars, but the anxious aides, the weary soldiers beyond the doors, and layered beneath it all the faint scratch of a name left centuries before. Even in that grave hour, private traces lingered, glowing quietly in the hall's eternal light. The hall seems alive with dualities, majesty and mischief, history and secrecy, symmetry and imperfection. You think of the mirrors themselves, meant to double every gesture of the king, to affirm his status as the sun around which the court revolved. And yet those same mirrors became confidants of visitors, who slipped from grand roles into private impulses, etching their initials into the glittering surface. Power wanted permanence, but what survived most tenderly were acts of quiet rebellion. You pause midway, where chandeliers gather in a constellation overhead. Looking into the mirrored wall, you see yourself multiplied into infinity, each version of you holding a different posture, a different possibility. Some look older, some younger, some seem to glance back with a knowing smile, as if the mirrors are less concerned with reflecting truth than with offering choices. Perhaps this is the real magic of the Hall of Mirrors. It does not show you who you are, but all the selves you might become. The silence deepens, but it is not an empty silence. It is the hum of centuries, the lullaby of Versailles itself, woven from marble, gilt, glass, and countless human stories. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the hall press gently around you. The air carries faint echoes of powdered wigs and rustling gowns, but also the universal sound of people simply wanting to be remembered. When you open your eyes, the scratches are still there, glinting faintly in the mirrored sea. Not flaws, but whispers marks of presence, small rebellions against oblivion. You realize that the Hall of Mirrors has always been more than spectacle. It is also memory's archive, holding not just the majesty of kings, but the fragile fingerprints of guests who once dared to inscribe themselves into eternity. And so you walk on, your reflection dissolving into candlelight, accompanied by the soft chorus of whispers etched into glass. You enter a chamber that seems more alive than silent. Heavy red velvet drapes fall like rivers of dusk against the tall windows, and the air carries a perfume that is rich, almost too sweet, as though roses and amber resin had been simmered together for centuries. The flicker of candles turns the room into a stage, each flame bending forward to whisper a story that only you are patient enough to hear. This is the domain once ruled by Madame de Montespan, the woman who held the heart and attention of Louis XIV for nearly 13 years. The walls themselves appear to know her secrets, their gilded panels glowing faintly, as if reluctant to let go of her presence. When you walk deeper, the sound of your own steps seems hushed, softened by the heavy carpet, woven in patterns of gold and crimson. It is easy to imagine the king himself pausing here, waiting for her to appear. To the world outside, she was the most powerful mistress of the Sun King, not simply a companion, but a force that shaped the rhythm of the court. Historians note that for over a decade, she dictated the fashion, the humor, even the politics of Versailles, her influence undeniable and far-reaching. You sense the weight of that history in the thick air, as if every candle carries a memory of an evening when whispers about her filled the room. The grandeur is undeniable, yet beneath it lingers something more shadowed. For all her glittering presence, Madame de Montespan was also a figure wrapped in rumors, some darker than the palace ever wished to acknowledge. Her name was pulled into the notorious affair of the poisons, that tangled episode of accusations, trials, and fears of black masses. Whether truth or slander, the idea that she might have resorted to rituals to maintain her hold over the king adds an unsettling undertone to the beauty around you. You glance at the shadows between the curtains and almost expect them to shift, as though they too remember secret rites whispered when the palace slept. The velvet chairs still gleam with threads that have survived centuries, their surfaces worn smooth by hands that once clasped them with nervous excitement or envy. The mirrors, though smaller than those in the Hall of Mirrors, reflect a softened glow of candlelight, bending her world into infinite layers. You cannot help but imagine her standing before them, adjusting a jewel or a strand of hair, confident that she ruled not only the king's attention, but also the atmosphere of Versailles itself. And yet, beneath that confidence, perhaps there was always a trace of fear. Power, after all, is never secure, and even velvet hides its weight in folds. As you breathe slowly, you notice how heavy the perfume becomes, almost like velvet in liquid form. It lingers on your tongue, bittersweet, and you think of how presence itself can be a fragrance, lingering long after the person has gone. Madame de Montespan became the very scent of the French court, unmistakable and overwhelming, the note around which every other detail arranged itself. But fragrance, like influence, fades, and what remains is only the echo of what once was. Stories tell that she once presided over evenings when poets, musicians, and noblemen gathered, their admiration rising like incense toward her. She shaped not only the tastes of the king, but the desires of the kingdom. Red silk gowns, jeweled brooches, witty remarks at the supper table, all of them became the markers of her reign. And yet, at the same time, rumors spread in hushed tones, powders, potions, whispers of charms meant to secure her supremacy. Versailles was not immune to superstition, even as it bathed itself in the light of the Sun King. The affair of the poisons brought fear to the entire court. Allegations of secret ceremonies, whispered invocations, and shadowed figures in candlelit rooms spread like smoke. Though historians debate the extent of her involvement, Madame de Montespan's name was forever attached to those whispers. You imagine her walking these halls with a calm face, even as the air grew thick with suspicion. Did she feel the walls lean closer? Did the mirrors reflect back her worries? Perhaps even the heavy drapes seemed to breathe slower, holding in the secrets that no one dared to speak aloud. The chamber tonight is quiet, but its silence is dense, like a book closed, but still warm from recent hands. You look at the red velvet, and think of how color can carry memory. Red is the hue of power, desire, and danger, and it clings here like a second skin. The flickering candles soften it into something less threatening, yet the undercurrent remains. You smile gently, realizing that even a room can feel dramatic, as if it wants to perform for you. Maybe this chamber has been waiting centuries for another audience. You sit in an imagined chair and let the perfume settle around you. The air feels thick, but it also invites you to slow down, to inhale deeply and exhale longer. The history does not demand fear, only attention. You remember that she was not only a mistress, but also a mother to many of the king's children, her lineage entwined with the legacy of France. Behind the power and the rumors was also a woman who lived, desired, feared, and hoped. That truth hums quietly under the red velvet, reminding you that even the most glittering figures are human. In the wavering candlelight, your reflection appears in one of the tall mirrors, and for a fleeting instant, it feels as though the centuries fold neatly upon themselves. Your outline overlaps with hers. Perhaps she too once stood here, pausing in the stillness, listening for answers that never spoke aloud. The faint trace of perfume drifts past, clinging stubbornly to time, and you smile at the strangeness of sharing a quiet moment with someone gone for more than 300 years. Versailles seems to know how to dissolve distance, resting history across your shoulders like a velvet shawl. As you remain, the chamber softens around you. The velvet feels protective rather than heavy. The lingering scent steadies rather than overwhelms, and the candles glow with the warmth of companions rather than enigmas. Even stories of suspicion lose their edges when told slowly in whispers. The silence hums again, gentle, knowing, and endlessly patient. The room is quieter than most at Versailles. You step inside and notice how the air feels heavier with calm, like a hush draped over every surface. The red velvet and perfume of Madame de Montespan's chambers seem far away now. Here, the colors are muted, the walls lined with tapestries that whisper rather than shout. A desk sits by a tall window, its surface scattered with sheets of parchment. The flicker of candlelight plays across them, making the ink shimmer as though words still long to speak. Françoise d'Aubigny, later known as Madame de Maintenon, began her life in modest shadows, far removed from this gilded palace. She once served as governess to the children of Louis XIV and Madame de Montespan. That role, humble though it may have seemed, became her quiet path to influence. Where Montespan had dazzled with wit and charm, Maintenon offered steadiness and patience. You can imagine her guiding small hands across lessons, her voice soft but firm, her eyes always steady. History records that after Montespan fell from grace, Maintenon's presence grew stronger. She became the trusted companion of Louis XIV, not through scandal or fiery passion, but through devotion and understanding. In time, their relationship deepened into something far more enduring than courtly whispers. Around the year 1683, they were secretly married, a union that changed the rhythm of the king's private world. It was never publicly announced, yet it was felt in every chamber of Versailles. As you look at the desk before you, it is easy to imagine Maintenon seated here. Her hand dips a quill into the inkwell, steady strokes forming lines across parchment. Her letters to the king were gentle, thoughtful, sometimes even motherly. Many survive, bound in archives filled with counsel, faith, and tender words. But others are gone, vanished into history without explanation. Were they destroyed by design or misplaced in the labyrinth of centuries? The mystery lingers, like the faint shadow of ink long erased. The candle flame near you bends slightly, as if acknowledging the weight of those missing letters. You wonder what secrets they held, perhaps confessions of doubt, or moments of vulnerability from a monarch otherwise known as the Sun King. Some say these letters could have revealed how deeply Maintenon shaped the king's choices, steering him toward piety and away from the glittering distractions of court. There is a stillness here, and in that stillness you almost hear the scratch of quill on paper. The sound is delicate, like a whisper of rain on leaves. Maintenon's handwriting flows steadily, more graceful than ornate, as though clarity was more important than flourish. You picture her pausing, blowing gently across the ink to dry it, the warm candlelight trembling against her face. This is not the chamber of a schemer, nor the lair of a conspirator, weaving plots behind heavy curtains. It is instead the quiet refuge of a confidante, a woman whose strength rested not in dazzling displays or grand theatrics, but in a softer, steadier presence. Here, power was not thunderous but enduring, not forced but patiently cultivated through constancy. Every fold of velvet, every whisper of paper and ink seems to affirm that influence can take the shape of listening, of counsel offered at the right moment, of loyalty that does not waver when the candles burn low. Louis XIV, often surrounded by courtiers eager for his favor, seemed to find in her something different, simplicity and truth. Their conversations were said to be calm, sometimes spiritual, always sincere. In her presence, the Sun King was not always the grand ruler of Europe, but simply a man seeking counsel. Perhaps this was why their bond endured quietly until his death. You glance at the parchments again, wondering how many evenings they spent like this, she writing, he reading by firelight, exchanging thoughts in the privacy of words. The very idea feels intimate in a way that far surpasses jewels or elaborate displays. Love here was not measured by diamonds, but by ink stains on fingertips. You cannot help but smile at the thought. Even monarchs could be touched by something as ordinary as a handwritten letter. The air carries a faint trace of wax and ink, a fragrance soft and steady. It mingles with the silence, which feels less like emptiness and more like companionship. You might even think of Maintenon herself, walking softly behind you, her skirts whispering against the floor, a gentle presence rather than a commanding one. Not all her letters survived, and perhaps that is fitting. What is missing leaves room for imagination, for tenderness that can never be pinned down. You may picture one of those lost pages, containing words of quiet encouragement, reminders to rest, to pray, to breathe. Or perhaps they carried confessions of fear during wars and losses, secrets shared only with the man who wore the crown. Those fragments, now gone, remind us that even in the grandest palace, intimacy is fragile, easily lost to time. The candle at your side flutters briefly, its flame bending as if uncertain, then straightens once more. The small flicker feels like a message, a reminder of resilience. Even the smallest light, when tested, can steady itself again, its quiet dance echoing the persistence of memory within these walls. You realize that Maintenon's influence was much the same, never loud, never overwhelming, but persistent and unwavering. She became the silent rhythm guiding the king through the later chapters of his reign. The room invites you to linger. The shadows sway like curtains, and the parchment glows with a warmth that feels timeless. You inhale slowly, letting the imagined scent of ink and old paper fill your senses. The softness of it makes you think of libraries, of bedtime stories read under dim lamplight, of moments where the world slows enough for words to matter. And in that thought, you realize something quietly humorous. After all the wars, palaces, and politics, what truly endured were not battles but letters. Perhaps the quill proved stronger than the sword, at least in the realm of affection. You allow that thought to settle as the candle flame flickers once more. This chamber does not echo with laughter or argument, but with the tender presence of words that once lived here. You step back slowly, your breath calm, as though you, too, have shared in a private letter meant only for the quiet of the night. The air changes as you step into a chamber touched with fragrance. It is not the faint wax and ink of Madame de Maintenon's quiet study. Here the air feels heavier, sweeter, as though invisible bouquets still drift lazily through time. Your senses stir with warmth, and you almost laugh, thinking the room smells like a luxury boutique that decided to age gracefully inside a palace. This was the world of Madame du Barry, the famous mistress of Louis XV. Born Jean Becue, she was not of noble blood, but carried herself with such radiant charm that she captured the king's attention. By the 1760s, Louis XV raised her to the role of his official mistress, a position of extraordinary influence in a court where appearances, alliances, and perfume held as much weight as crowns. Some historians still debate whether her rise was planned by powerful courtiers or whether it was simply her natural charm that enchanted a weary king. By the time Madame du Barry entered his life, the king had grown older, his reign heavy with years of formality and duty. Yet in her presence he discovered a brightness that felt almost like youth rediscovered. She carried a playful charm, a lightness that slipped past the stiff etiquette of court. The palace, long used to whispers of politics and carefully measured words, found itself stirred by her laughter, clear and quick as the chime of crystal. It was as though a hidden window had opened, letting in spring air where silence had once lingered. Yet her origins remained wrapped in mystery. Many rumors swirled. Was she truly the daughter of a seamstress? Or was there something hidden in her lineage that people preferred to whisper about rather than confirm? Versailles loved gossip more than truth, and du Barry became one of its favorite stories. To some she was scandal incarnate, a commoner elevated too high. To others she was proof that wit and charm could bend even the strictest codes of nobility. You picture her chambers draped in pale fabrics, perhaps lavender or powder blue, the kind of colors chosen to soothe, but also to flatter candlelight. Perfume bottles lined the tables, their glass catching soft glints of flame. Each scent would have told its own story: rose for romance, jasmine for seduction, orange blossom for youth. You almost expect one of the corked bottles to sigh open, releasing a secret fragrance that has waited centuries to be noticed. In her presence, Louis XV reportedly softened. He invited her to dinners, presented her with jewels, and let her voice carry weight in matters beyond mere luxury. She was not known for political maneuvering like Madame de Pompadour before her, but du Barry understood the power of presence. Sometimes influence is not a sharp blade, but a gentle fragrance that lingers, impossible to ignore. As you stand here, you notice the faintest markings etched into the edge of a mirror. They look like scratches at first, but closer inspection makes you wonder, were they left intentionally? A guest leaning too close, or perhaps someone inscribing initials in a moment of secret admiration. Little mysteries like these turn Versailles into less of a museum and more of a living diary. The whispers about du Barry were not kind. Some said she was placed beside the king to serve the ambitions of others, a puppet rather than a partner. Yet records also reveal her kindness, her generosity to those who served her, and a playful spirit that could soften the edges of a court grown stiff with etiquette. To walk into her rooms now is to feel that same softness. The heavy perfumes do not overwhelm. They drift like laughter at the end of a long supper. Louis XV's court was an intricate dance, a choreography of politics, alliances, and vanity. In that world, du Barry played her role with a mixture of innocence and calculated charm. Imagine her adjusting a lace cuff, a playful smile flickering, while entire conversations turned around her presence. Even silence could be a form of influence, as if she knew that sometimes saying less allowed others to reveal more. The flames bend lightly, as if inclining toward her memory, their golden sway casting shapes that suggest her presence still lingers. You can almost picture Jean du Barry reclining with effortless grace, her silken gown spilling like water, her jewels glimmering with each flicker. Yet within that elegance lived the woman herself, Jean, who knew laughter as easily as tears, who loved deeply, and who bore the heavy weight of being both cherished and condemned. In these shifting lights, she is no longer a symbol of scandal or splendor. but simply human, fragile, radiant, and unforgettable. There is a quiet irony that lingers here. Versailles, built to glorify power and permanence, became the backdrop for a woman whose greatest strength was fleeting charm. Perfume fades, laughter fades, yet both leave behind a trace that memory clings to. Even centuries later, you find yourself wondering about her, more curious than judgmental. The room holds its silence, yet it is not empty. The air is still perfumed, still layered with mystery. Perhaps this is the true legacy of Madame du Barry, not the jewels, not the titles, but the reminder that even in the grandest palace, the softest presence can alter the rhythm of power. You smile at the thought, letting the imagined scent of roses linger a little longer. It feels almost comical to think that wars were planned in one chamber, while perfumes were chosen in another, and yet both shaped history in their own way. Versailles was never just about grandeur. It was also about the quiet, fragrant details that told stories long after the candles dimmed. You draw in one final, unhurried breath within her chamber, and as you exhale, it slips out like a trace of perfume she might once have left behind. The air feels gentler now, as if softened by her memory, wrapping you in a quiet tenderness. When you step away, the silence of the palace greets you, not cold but companionable, carrying with it the faint echo of her presence. Down the corridor, each footstep feels lighter, as though you are not merely walking, but transporting a secret, her lingering fragrance, her unseen story, woven delicately into the stillness of Versailles night. You step out from the warm, perfumed chambers into the calm of the open night, and the air greets you softly, like a familiar hand brushing your cheek. The heavy sweetness of silks and lingering perfumes fades, replaced by a cool, clear scent carried on the breath of leaves and dew. You pause at the threshold, letting your senses adjust, your body shifting from the intimate glow of candlelight to the expansive calm of moonlit gardens. The pathways stretch before you, lined with hedges that murmur quietly in the night breeze. Versailles is renowned for its grand halls, but the gardens hold their own stories, whispered in the rustle of leaves and the gentle sway of fountains. If you simply slow down and listen, they speak with an elegance all their own. The gravel crunches beneath your shoes, each step a reminder that you are leaving behind the dense layers of courtly intrigue. Out here, the palace does not loom. It recedes, glowing faintly like a lantern left on a windowsill. Ahead stretches a long avenue of trees, their branches holding the evening sky like careful hands. The twilight has softened into something between blue and silver, and shadows lengthen as if they are preparing to lie down and rest for the night. There is a rhythm in the gardens, one that feels older than kings. The fountains trickle in the distance, their voices low, like storytellers growing sleepy. Statues keep their patient watch, their marble faces glowing faintly in the moonlight. You wonder how many eyes have gazed upon them with admiration or indifference, and whether the statues in turn learn to gaze back. The thought makes you smile. Imagination has a way of turning stone into companions when the night is quiet enough. Walking deeper along the pathways, you notice the flowers have begun their own version of rest. Some blossoms close tightly, keeping their fragrance tucked away, while others release one final note into the air before surrendering to darkness. The scents mix gently: rose, lavender, perhaps a hint of honeysuckle, an orchestra playing its last soft measures before silence. You breathe in slowly, as if each scent were an invitation to linger a little longer. It is here, away from walls and ceilings, that you begin to sense the true luxury Versailles offered. Not just grandeur, but space. Space to walk, to breathe, to feel small in the face of something vast yet ordered. The gardens were designed with precision, every hedge trimmed, every vista calculated. And yet, under moonlight, the geometry softens. The rigid lines blur, and nature reclaims the edges, reminding you that even the strictest designs eventually yield to time. You come upon a fountain that no longer performs for the crowds. Its waters move lazily, catching fragments of moonlight like scattered coins. You lean closer, and the reflection surprises you. For a moment, it feels as if the palace itself has bent down to look into the water, its gilded windows now trembling in liquid form. History seems less like something behind you, and more like something mirrored alive, shimmering, and waiting to be acknowledged. Somewhere beyond the garden walls, a night bird lets out its call. The sound is soft yet clear, breaking the silence without ever truly disturbing it, like a single violin note woven gently into a lullaby. You stop for a moment, letting the quiet music settle around you. How different this feels compared to the grand trumpets and polished harps that once echoed through these same grounds. There is no performance here, no audience to impress. The bird sings because it cannot help but sing, because that is its nature. In that simplicity, you sense a truth beauty does not need applause to be real. It only needs to exist, carried on the air, delicate and enduring. You follow a narrower path now, one less grand, bordered by hedges that feel like protective walls. The intimacy of the walkway draws you inward, and for a moment you forget the vastness of Versailles. The world contracts into the space of a corridor of leaves, a secret tunnel where you can hear your own heartbeat more clearly. You think about the courtiers who must have walked here, whispering confidences or daring to laugh too loudly. Perhaps lovers once used this path for stolen moments. The garden, after all, was both a stage and a sanctuary. As you emerge, the Grand Canal comes into view, its long surface shining like a silver ribbon laid carefully across the earth. You can almost picture the boats that once floated here, filled with music and laughter, the court turning even water into theater. Tonight, though, the canal is hushed, its waters resting. You stand at its edge, looking at the reflection of the stars trembling on the surface, and it feels as though the sky has doubled itself just for your benefit. You settle onto a stone bench, letting the night gently wrap around you. Its cool surface grounds you, as if it remembers all who have rested here before. Closing your eyes, you feel the silence deepen, not the emptiness of vacant rooms, but a full, gentle stillness. Life continues softly all around, content and unhurried, needing no audience or spectacle. In this quiet embrace, you feel connected, calm, and carried by the serene rhythm of the night. Here, far from the glittering chandeliers and the bustle of courtiers, Versailles feels alive, as if it breathes along with you. The gardens do not demand your awe. Instead, they quietly invite your presence, asking only that you move slowly, notice the rustle of leaves, and let the night settle around you. Each pathway, each fountain, seems to murmur softly, carrying stories of long-past footsteps without pressing them upon you. In this gentle twilight, you realize that the true gift of your stroll is not the grandeur you see, nor the history you recall, but the serene stillness you now carry within yourself. When you finally stand again, your steps feel slower, gentler. The gravel crunches softly, almost like applause for your willingness to pause. Ahead, the palace glows faintly, waiting for your return. But for now, the night is yours. You let the air wrap around you like a cloak, fragrant with leaves and water, and continue walking, each step a small act of gratitude for the quiet rhythm of the garden at twilight. The corridors of Versailles open, then soften, leading you away from gilded chambers and echoing marble into a place of gentler proportion, the Petit Trianon. Unlike the great halls designed to dazzle and overwhelm, this retreat breathes differently. The ceilings are lower, the windows wide, the air touched with a quiet calm. Here you are no longer surrounded by the roar of power, but by the hum of intimacy. And it is here that the figure of Madame de Pompadour lingers most vividly. Born Jean Antoinette Poisson, she rose from a bourgeois family to a position that both scandalized and fascinated the French court. She was not merely Louis XV's mistress, though that role alone would have been enough to carve her into history. For nearly 2 decades, She became his confidant, his advisor, his mirror of refinement. Court gossip swirled endlessly, yet what remains undeniable is her influence. She shaped taste, softened the king's moods, and brought into Versailles the Enlightenment itself. The Petit Trianon, though later famously associated with Marie Antoinette, first echoed with her presence. You could almost see her arranging a delicate tea service on a low table, porcelain cups catching candlelight. The fragrance of brewed leaves drifts into the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of pastries. Around her, not courtiers jostling for favor, but artists, philosophers, architects. She gathered minds as others gathered jewels, and in her company, ideas were treated as treasures. On the walls hang paintings she might have admired, landscapes softened by pastel skies, portraits capturing fleeting expressions instead of rigid poses. She championed the Rococo style, with its curves, its playfulness, its intimacy. Critics might have dismissed it as frivolous, but in her world it was a language, an antidote to the severity of power, a declaration that beauty could soften rule. One can imagine her fingers tracing the gilt frame of a new canvas, pausing thoughtfully, before praising or suggesting in a voice both gentle and decisive. Books lie scattered across a nearby table, their spines cracked from use. Voltaire's wit, Montesquieu's reason, the encyclopedia's bold cataloguing of knowledge, all voices of a new age. Madame de Pompadour read them not in secret, but with intent. She brought these authors to the king's attention, cushioning their radical ideas with charm. It was said that her salon was both shield and stage, where dangerous thoughts were entertained safely under her patronage. Here, Enlightenment thinkers found a courtly ally, dressed not in armor, but in silk and wit. The mystery that clings to her is not of scandalous affairs alone, but of endurance. Whispers persisted that even after the physical passion between her and Louis XV cooled, her influence remained undiminished. She became, in essence, indispensable. The keeper of the king's moods, the organizer of his entertainments, the arbiter of his cultural taste. Some said she understood him better than he understood himself, guiding him away from fits of melancholy, steering his court with invisible hands. How curious, you think, that power sometimes lies not in command, but in companionship. The room you linger in carries faint scents of wax and aged wood, yet your imagination fills it with bergamot tea and crushed rose petals. Pale velvet chairs invite you to sit, gentle and welcoming. A small hearth fire flickers over stacks of sheet music, casting playful shadows that echo imagined harpsichord notes. Madame de Pompadour cherished music, not merely as a listener, but as a performer, nurturing composers who might have remained unheard. The light dances softly across the room, weaving warmth and sound into a quiet harmony, as if the past hums gently around you, steady and inviting. You imagine her seated by the window, sunlight spilling gently across the folds of her gown. Perhaps she is sketching delicate patterns, or quietly annotating a manuscript, or simply gazing at the gardens beyond, where every tree and path conceals careful planning. She flourished in such spaces, where elegance masked intention and effortlessness concealed exacting control. Watching her here, you sense how her presence balanced grace with calculation, a reflection of life at court itself. Outwardly serene, inwardly meticulous, she navigated her world with poise and precision, each gesture measured, yet seemingly spontaneous, a quiet mastery woven into every moment. Even the teacup in her hand becomes symbolic. To drink tea was not simply refreshment, but ritual, an imported luxury transformed into intimacy. Around that porcelain vessel swirled discussions of philosophy, architecture, theater. She invited actors to Versailles, staged plays, introduced the king to performances that stretched the imagination beyond duty and war. For her, art was not escape but a form of influence, shaping not just taste but thought itself. Some historians continue to debate whether her ascent was meticulously orchestrated by influential courtiers or whether it was her own innate magnetism that propelled her forward. Perhaps it was a delicate blend of both, an elegant dance of circumstance and personal charm. Ambition and allure often move hand in hand, and she mastered the steps with subtle precision. What remains indisputable, however, is the lasting imprint she left on the world around her. Grand buildings erected under her guidance, theaters illuminated with new works of art, and ideas flourishing quietly because she provided them a safe passage. Each achievement bore her quiet signature, a testament to a presence that shaped taste, culture, and thought, leaving traces that outlasted fleeting favor and whispered through the corridors of history long after the applause had faded. As you sit in this imagined salon, the candlelight soft, and the voices of Enlightenment authors murmuring from their pages, you feel a quiet reverence. Versailles is often remembered for spectacle, but Madame de Pompadour's legacy is subtler. It lies not in fireworks or proclamations, but in the steady shaping of taste and the gentle protection of ideas. Her power was neither shouted nor displayed. It was sipped like tea, savored slowly until it transformed those who shared her table. The night deepens outside, and the Petit Trianon seems to fold into silence. Yet within that silence, her presence endures. You rise, letting your hand brush the spine of a book left open on the table. Its ink smells faintly of possibility. Perhaps this is her true gift, that centuries later, in a quiet room, you can still feel the warmth of a woman who made art and thought indispensable companions to power. The air shifts as you leave the salons and drift toward the gardens once more. The paths narrow, the grandeur of Versailles softens, and soon you find yourself standing before a smaller, more intimate residence, the Petit Trianon. Its facade, elegant but modest compared to the main chateau, feels almost like a secret whispered into stone. Built originally under the patronage of Madame de Pompadour, it was intended as a retreat and escape from the suffocating etiquette of court life. Ironically, she never truly inhabited it, her health failing before she could enjoy the refuge she had envisioned. Instead, the little palace passed into other hands, and eventually it became most famously associated with Marie Antoinette. If the Hall of Mirrors dazzles with spectacle, the Petit Trianon soothes with quiet. Ivy clings to pale walls, the windows framed by climbing greenery. A hush always seems to linger here, as though the building is holding its breath. Unlike the theatrical symmetry of Versailles, this retreat seems more human-scaled. You imagine the queen walking in her simpler gowns, free from the weight of jewels, her laughter carried by the breeze into the gardens. Yet the Petit Trianon holds more than sunlight and roses. It harbors shadow-soft, lingering whispers of courtiers, queens, and something stranger, harder to define. Among Versailles' many tailies, few are as curious or quietly unsettling as the so-called time slip reported here in the early 20th century. Visitors claimed moments of displacement, fleeting sensations of being elsewhere or elsewhen, where familiar rooms felt subtly altered, as if history itself had bent. These stories, half remembered and half whispered, infuse the Petit Trianon with a gentle mystery, a reminder that even in beauty, the palace can quietly bend the perception of time. In 1901, two English women, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, visited Versailles. They wandered into the Petit Trianon gardens, expecting a quiet afternoon of history and leisure. Instead, they later claimed, the landscape transformed around them. The air grew heavy. Colors dulled, as if washed in sepia. Figures appeared, people in unfamiliar clothing, styled not for the Belle Epoque, but for the late 18th century. They saw a young woman sketching near the Trianon, her gown pale green, her hair hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. The two women would later insist that they had seen none other than Marie Antoinette herself, moments before the Revolution came crashing into her life. Their account, published in a book called An Adventure, became one of the most famous tales of time slips in modern folklore. Some dismissed it as fancy, a trick of memory, or even an elaborate hoax. Others took it more seriously, pointing out the precision of the women's descriptions, paths and garden structures that, at the time of their visit, were overgrown or forgotten, but matched records from the 18th century. How could they have known such details unless they had, in some uncanny way, stepped through the veil of time? Standing here, you begin to understand why the legend persists. Twilight deepens, shadows stretch across the lawns, and the Petit Trianon looks less like a retreat and more like a stage set awaiting actors. The air has its own texture, as though history thickens in this small pocket, unwilling to fade. You could almost believe that if you turned too quickly, you might catch a powdered wig vanishing around the corner, or hear the echo of courtly laughter trailing into the hedges. Inside, the Petit Trianon is no less haunting. The rooms are intimate, paneled in pale woods, decorated with delicate floral motifs. They seem designed for conversation rather than ceremony, for whispers rather than proclamations. Yet the very coziness makes the shadows more noticeable. Candlelight trembles across the walls, and you cannot help imagining the ghost of Pompadour sighing for the home she never lived in, or Marie Antoinette resting here, unaware that destiny would soon turn her private refuge into a relic of lost innocence. The story of Moberly and Jourdain also carries another layer of mystery. After their alleged encounter, both women described feelings of disorientation and dread, as though they had walked not merely into another century, but into a tragedy still unresolved. Perhaps it was their own projection, colored by knowledge of the Queen's fate. Or perhaps the Petit Trianon, saturated with centuries of longing and sorrow, briefly peeled back its layers to reveal a sliver of another age. The notion of a time slip tempts the imagination. If true, it means the past is not gone, merely folded, overlapping with the present like pages in a book. Here, where Pompadour dreamed of escape and Antoinette sought refuge, those folds seem particularly fragile. You feel it even now, the sense that each step might echo in 2 centuries at once, your breath mingling with the sighs of courtiers long dust. There is something tender in the idea, too. The Petit Trianon becomes not only a site of history, but of empathy. For a moment, 2 visitors glimpsed a queen, not as a symbol of decadence or revolution, but as a woman, sketching quietly in her garden, longing for simplicity. Perhaps that is why the tale endures, because it strips away the myths and lets us see Antoinette not as a monarch, but as human. The night air outside grows cooler, the garden silvered by moonlight. You step back from the Petit Trianon, but the feeling clings. The building is modest compared to Versailles grandeur, yet in its modesty lies something far more powerful: intimacy, vulnerability, mystery. It reminds you that palaces are not only places of spectacle, but also sanctuaries, and sometimes thin places where time itself feels uncertain. As you turn to leave, a final glance over your shoulder catches the dim windows of the Petit Trianon. For a fleeting heartbeat, you think you see a shadowy figure in a pale gown, bent delicately over a sketchpad, utterly absorbed, as if centuries had folded around her. You blink, and the vision dissolves, leaving only the stillness of the sleeping Petit Trianon, guarding its quiet secrets. Yet, as you step away, a gentle awareness lingers. History here does not reside solely in books or relics. Sometimes, in the hush of the gardens and halls, it walks softly alongside you, brushing against your thoughts, and leaving traces of a presence that feels surprisingly alive. The palace corridors darken and cool as you move away from the warm glow of mirrors and chandeliers, each step carrying you deeper into shadow and quiet. The air thins, taking on a sharper edge, as if the stones themselves are storing memories of sorrow rather than celebration. In this softened silence, you arrive at the story of Louise de la Vallière, the first official mistress of Louis XIV. Her tale feels different from the others, a quieter melody, less embroidered with jewels and more woven with tears. Louise was not born into great power. Unlike the women who would follow her, she did not come to Versailles with ambitions carved like armor. She was gentle, shy, and by most accounts, deeply devout. Her beauty caught the young king's eye, and for a time she lived in the bright center of his affection. Yet even at the height of her influence, there was always a shadow in her gaze, a sense that her heart beat to a rhythm too soft for the glittering court. For nearly a decade, Louise lived as the king's mistress. She bore him children, smiled at the pageantry, and tried to adapt to the currents of life at Versailles. Still, her spirit never fully bent to the role. Courtiers whispered that she often seemed uneasy, her modesty at odds with the opulence around her. Unlike Madame de Montespan, who embraced intrigue with wit and confidence, Louise appeared burdened by the weight of her position. It was as if each jewel placed upon her was less an ornament and more a stone pressing down upon her heart. The defining act of her life was not her years at court, but her departure from it. When Louis's attentions shifted to Montespan, Louise withdrew not in scandal, but in surrender. She chose to leave Versailles, exchanging silken chambers for the austere walls of the Carmelite convent in Paris. This act of renunciation shocked the court, where ambition usually burned brighter than devotion. But for Louise, retreat was not weakness. It was a final gesture of strength. A reclamation of her soul from the gilded prison of power. History tells us she entered the convent in 1674. From that moment, she lived a life of strict discipline, fasting, prayer, silence. She became Sister Louise of Mercy, her name itself a reminder of the path she had chosen. She would remain there for 36 years, long after the world of Versailles had moved on. Yet before she left, whispers tell of one last haunting scene. It is said that on her final night at Versailles, Louise walked the corridors alone. She paused in the shadows, her hands grazing the cold stone walls as tears slipped down her face. Some claimed they heard her weeping, the soft sound carrying through the halls like a lament. Whether this moment is fact or legend hardly matters. In the silence of Versailles, one can almost still hear the echo of her grief, an echo that lingers because it was born not of scandal, but of sincerity. Now imagine the convent she entered. Its stone halls are stark, stripped of ornament. Where Versailles blazed with light, here shadows rule. The air smells not of perfume and candle wax, but of dust, parchment, and faint incense. In winter, the cold seeps through the walls like a second skin, and each breath leaves a pale mist in the air. Bells toll across the cloisters, slow and deliberate, each note a reminder that time here does not rush. Instead, it circles, hour after hour, in rhythm with prayers that have no end. Louise walked those cloisters with quiet steps, her silk gowns replaced with coarse wool. She no longer dined from silver trays, but from simple bowls. The very austerity of it must have been its own comfort proof that she had shed the pageantry and embraced a truer self. And yet, one can imagine her dreams. Did she ever close her eyes and see the glittering halls again? Did the sound of bells at matins ever blur into the faint memory of music drifting from a Versailles ball? What makes her story haunting is the honesty of her conflict. She was not a saint without struggle. Records suggest she often wept, feeling both the weight of her past and the difficulty of her penance. She called herself a public sinner, harsh in her judgment of her own life, even though she had been more a pawn of affection than a schemer. That contradiction, devotion mingled with sorrow, makes her presence at Versailles linger more deeply than many who plotted, triumphed, and vanished without reflection. Tonight, walking through the palace, the air feels cool with her memory. The laughter of courtiers has faded, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps along the stone corridors. You sense it in the marble halls, in a whisper that might be wind or something more. It is Louise's quiet farewell, lingering, subtle, and eternal, forever stitched into the very walls of the palace. A presence that moves with you, even in the deepest silence. The convent bells still seem to ring if you listen hard enough. They are not harsh, but steady, like a pulse. Each note seems to travel back across centuries, reading the hush of Versailles, blending palace and cloister into one long prayer. The sound does not disturb. It soothes like waves folding against a shore. You almost laugh at the thought that even the stern bells of penance could make for a lullaby. But in this moment, they do. In Louise's story, you find no scandal to inflame curiosity, no jewels glittering in the firelight. Instead, you find something rarer at Versailles: humility, sorrow, redemption. She walked away from a world that could have consumed her, and in doing so, left behind an echo more profound than many who stayed. And so, as you pause in the dim hush of these corridors, you sense her presence not as a ghost bound in regret, but as a whisper of resilience. The palace may have dazzled with its mirrors and marble, but it is her silent retreat that offers a different kind of reflection. One not of vanity, but of the human soul searching for peace. The evening inside Versailles unfolds like a painting slowly revealing its strokes. You enter one of the great dining halls, where the light softens, bending around polished surfaces. The scent of melted wax hangs in the air, warm but never overwhelming, mingling with the faint memory of roasted meats, herbs, and fresh bread. A long table stretches before you, set with gleaming silver trays that shimmer as if they have absorbed centuries of candlelight. They rest in quiet ranks, polished so carefully that each one almost pretends to be a mirror, reflecting fragments of your face alongside flames that sway and hum. You step closer, and the hall welcomes you with a profound silence. It is not empty, but layered with echoes of voices long gone, soft laughter, whispered conversations, the faint clink of glassware drifting through your mind. Tonight, no meal is in motion. Chairs remain still, dishes untouched, and silver trays rest like actors poised behind curtains. In this stillness, a quiet richness emerges. Absence itself has texture. Each pause between imagined courses feels as meaningful as the food once served. When Louis XIV dined publicly, every gesture was a performance. Courtiers gathered not just to eat, but to witness power choreographed on silver. Every dish, goblet, and candle was positioned with care, while servants moved in practiced rhythm, their trays gliding like dancers. The king's simple act of lifting a spoonful of broth was a subtle theater, as if even a taste could whisper the secrets of Versailles, blending humor with the weight of statecraft. Yet beyond the performance, there were the quieter evenings. The suppers, when the palace exhaled, when fewer eyes observed, and when conversation turned from strategy to the simple comfort of sharing food. In those nights, the silver trays lost their ceremonial weight and became companions, carriers of warmth, of bread broken gently, of fruits sliced and sweet. You imagine the glow of candles across grapes that looked like jewels, or the delicate cut of a pear shining as though kissed by moonlight. The silver did not need to boast then. It only had to hold nourishment with dignity. One tray catches your attention. Its surface holds faint scratches, so fine they almost disappear in the shifting light. These are not marks of neglect, but of use, evidence of hands placing goblets, knives, and spoons across its face again and again. You smile at the thought that even silver grows weary of perfection, craving a little imperfection to feel alive. Maybe trays, like people, prefer not to be untouchable. Candlelight plays across the room, flickering over carved wood, embroidered chairs, and gilded walls. Shadows stretch and collapse, folding like velvet curtains over the silverware. You notice how the flames lean toward the trays, eager to see themselves reflected. Each tray holds not just light, but layers of time, the glow of the Sun King's dinners, the laughter of Madame de Montespan, the quiet dignity of Madame de Maintenon, the perfume of Dewberry, drifting past the bread, the poised gaze of Pompadour considering art between courses. Each woman left an invisible fingerprint upon these meals. Even if their touch was not recorded in ink dot, there is something meditative about the rhythm of dining. A plate placed, a glass lifted, a silence shared, a candle guttering low. Even centuries later, the cadence remains here. You find yourself breathing with that rhythm. In, out, in, out. A supper may seem ordinary, but when repeated across years and lives, it becomes its own ceremony. A reminder that sustenance is not only for the body, but for the soul. You might chuckle, thinking even kings needed to chew like the rest of us, though no one dared to point it out at the table. Among the courtly rituals, the grand couvert stood apart when the king dined in public. Eyes fixed upon him, courtiers watched in silence, each bite transformed into a gesture of power. Foreign visitors marveled, describing it less as a meal than a living painting, every motion deliberate, every glance weighted. You can almost sense the king's own longing for quiet and unobserved supper where wine could be sipped without symbolism. The chairs along the table retained faint impressions, as though velvet remembers the weight of those seated. The air shifts where laughter or whispers once rose, and you imagine courtiers balancing wit and caution, aware that a single misstep could shatter reputation. Even a meal became performance, and you can't help but think it was perhaps the most stressful dinner party history has ever hosted. Yet tonight, none of that tension exists. The trays rest quietly, holding only the reflections of candles and shadows. The chairs are unoccupied, their velvet cooling in the hush. The hall is not a theater now, but a sanctuary where the ghosts of meals past recline with ease. The air does not demand conversation. It only invites breath, steady and slow. There is something soothing in the sight of silver trays. They do not speak. They do not argue. They do not remind you of forgotten tasks. They simply shine patiently, like moons arranged upon a table. Their glow joins the candlelight in creating a lull, a rhythm of softness that steadies your thoughts. You let your shoulders fall, your jaw unclench, your mind drift. A supper without food becomes a supper for the imagination, nourishing in its own way. As you turn from the table, the silence does not break. It deepens, like the pause after the last note of a song, when the echo carries more weight than the music itself. You sense that Versailles, in all its grandeur, understood the importance of such pauses. Even kings needed to rest, even silver needed to cool, even candles needed to sway lazily before surrendering to smoke. And so you leave the hall, the silver trays behind you still shimmering faintly in the candlelight. They remain as they always have, silent witnesses to hunger, joy, ceremony, and fatigue. Their gleam is not loud, but enduring, like the steady glow of the moon across centuries. In their quietness, you find calm. Supper has ended, and in its ending, you discover peace. You step into a quieter wing of the palace, where the air feels cooler, tinged with the scent of vellum and ink. The room you enter is long, its ceiling high but softened by the hush of books that line the shelves from floor to arch. The library of Versailles is no ordinary room. It is both sanctuary and confessional, a place where knowledge, secrets, and hearts alike found shelter. Candles sway along the walls, casting a gentle glow over leather-bound volumes, some still proud with gold-stamped titles, others sagging with age, spines creased like weathered hands. You trace a finger along the shelf, feeling the dust settle, a soft layer of history resting on knowledge once urgent. Perhaps an astronomy treatise, a hidden philosophical manuscript, or a poet's delicate script meant for private eyes. Each book seems to pulse faintly, a heartbeat slowed by centuries, yet still alive. The library was more than a place for study. It served as refuge. Courtiers escaping the ever-watchful gaze of Versailles would slip in, finding silence like a gentle balm. Even the king requested works here, histories, architectural guides, or theological musings, but the walls hold secrets beyond sanctioned knowledge. Tucked behind grand tomes are letters, diaries, and private confessions, intimate fragments of lives lived quietly amid the grandeur. Imagine, for a moment, a lady in waiting slipping a folded page between two heavy atlases. Her words, ink still wet, were not meant for public scrutiny, but for one pair of eyes only. A lover's promise, a fear of disgrace, a desperate plea to be remembered. The library became her accomplice, guarding her letter as if the shelves themselves swore an oath of silence. The letter may still rest there, yellowed, forgotten, waiting for fingers that will never come. You notice a writing desk in the corner, its wood darkened by candle soot and countless nights of use. Upon it lies a scatter of quills, their tips worn down, and a small bottle of dried ink. The desk feels intimate, almost intrusive to look upon, as though you have stumbled into someone's private ritual. You picture Madame de Maintenon here, bent low over parchment, composing words of devotion and counsel to Louis XIV. Her letters, some preserved, speak of duty and affection, but also of fatigue, of longing for rest. Not all of them survived. Some vanished into fire or secrecy. The library, perhaps, remembers what we cannot. The silence is thick, yet gentle. It is the kind of silence that absorbs confession without judgment. You breathe in, and the air feels heavy with the residue of unspoken thoughts. If the marble halls outside were stages of performance, this library was where masks could slip. A duke admitting despair in the margins of a book. A scholar scribbling doubts about the king's grand projects. A queen writing to a confidant in words sweeter than duty allowed. The confessions are not shouted, but whispered, preserved between covers and fibers, never daring to echo aloud. A draft brushes past your cheek, carrying the faint rustle of pages shifting. The books seem to move like sleepers turning in their dreams. You pause, listening, and almost believe you hear a sigh, whether from the wood of the shelves or the ghosts of writers past. You cannot say. The room feels alive, and you realize that memory does not only dwell in mirrors or tapestries. It lingers here, ink pressed into fibers, sentences etched into silence. You take a candle closer to one shelf and discover volumes that once belonged to Madame de Pompadour. Margins filled with delicate notes in her hand, comments on plays, questions for philosophers, reflections on art. In these notes lies her truest voice, less rehearsed than her salons, more vulnerable than her portraits. The library does not parade her beauty or wit. It cradles the quiet part of her, the woman who sought to understand the Enlightenment, even as she lived within the rituals of monarchy. Nearby, another stack bears the faint perfume of Madame du Barry, or so you imagine. Perhaps she tucked a ribbon between the pages of a novel, leaving a trace of herself in cloth and scent. To hold the ribbon now would be to hold a fragment of her life, more personal than any jewel she ever wore. The library, in its way, preserves intimacy better than any gallery of portraits. And then, there are the books. No one speaks of the volumes confiscated, censored, hidden. Whispers of heretical thoughts, dangerous philosophies, treatises that dared question divine right. Some were locked away, but others were kept here, bound in plain covers, pretending innocence. They rest now like sleeping conspirators, their dangerous words dulled by time, yet still sharp if awakened. The library hums with their restrained energy, as though warning you that even silence can hold rebellion. As you linger, the candlelight bends low, its flame trembling. The desk, the shelves, the scattered letters, all seem to lean toward you, as if encouraging you to leave behind your own confession. What would you write if given parchment and quill? Would it be a love letter, a secret hope, an unspoken regret? The library offers no answer. It only waits, patient, its walls accustomed to keeping confidences. When you finally turn to leave, You glance back one last time. The room does not stir, yet you sense it watching, or perhaps listening. The books keep their silence, as they always have, but you feel lighter for having stood among them. Some confessions do not need to be written or spoken. It is enough to know that there exists a place where they could rest, if you wished. The door closes softly behind you, sealing the library in its perpetual hush. And as you walk back into the corridor, you carry with you the gentle truth that history's loudest voices are not always the most enduring. Sometimes it is the quiet confessions, folded into margins, slipped between books, hidden in candlelit rooms that survive, waiting patiently to be heard by those who listen closely. The air changes as you enter the royal bedchamber. It is warmer here, softened not by the weight of books or the fragrance of ink, but by fabric layers upon layers of silk that drape the walls and canopy. The chamber breathes differently than the rest of the palace. Where the hall of mirrors dazzles with reflections and the gardens stretch into infinity, this room folds inward. It is meant not for spectacle, but for repose, a stage for endings and beginnings, a sanctuary shaped by fabric and flame. The silk curtains move faintly with the draught, like tides retreating and returning along a hidden shore. Their sheen shifts from deep crimson to muted gold, depending on the candlelight, reminding you that even shadows here wear finery. You reach out and brush your fingers against one fold, surprised at how cool it feels, despite the thickness. Silk holds a kind of memory, too. It has absorbed countless nights of whispers, of royal prayers, of lovers' secrets. The cloth does not speak, yet its silence is saturated. Above, the canopy stretches like a tent of woven dusk. Patterns stitched with delicate thread glimmer as though stars had been captured in fabric. You imagine a king lying beneath, staring upward while attendants withdrew into the shadows. For Louis XIV, the bed was not merely a place to rest, but a stage upon which ceremony unfolded. His rising and his sleeping were acts of state, performed before witnesses. The silk and candlelight were accomplices to both sovereignty and vulnerability. The candles here burn lower, shorter, more subdued. They do not attempt the grand display of chandeliers. Instead, each flame huddles close to its wick, glowing like a secret kept too long. Their light bends across the folds of fabric, sketching gentle silhouettes that sway when the draught sneaks in. The shadows are not sharp, but softened, as if the room refuses harshness. Even the darkness here is dressed in silk dot at the far end of the chamber. Silver basins and gilt mirrors glint faintly, reminders that rituals of cleanliness once mingled with whispers of fatigue. Servants once moved silently through this space, carrying warm water, laying garments across velvet stools, bowing out before the curtains were drawn. Now their absence is almost audible, the hush of a room too accustomed to activity to settle easily into stillness. You pause by the great bed itself. Its size is imposing, though softened by layers of quilt and drape. The mattress, though changed over centuries, seems to retain the gravity of all who lay upon it. Here kings dreamed, perhaps fitfully. Here mistresses lingered, both adored and scrutinized. Here, too, death approached, slow and ceremonial, as courtiers whispered prayers into the folds of the canopy. The bedchamber is not only a place of sleep, it is an archive of human thresholds. Love, fatigue, authority. Decline. You lean closer, noticing how the shadows on the silk resemble faces, fleeting and half-formed. They dissolve as the candle trembles, but the impression lingers. How many gazes did this room contain? How many nights did eyes remain open long after attendants withdrew? Perhaps a queen stared at the ceiling, rehearsing in silence the words she would never speak aloud. Perhaps a king turned restlessly, haunted not by enemies abroad, but by doubts within. The bedchamber is a mirror without glass, reflecting the truths that ceremony could not hide. There is a fragrance here, as well not of roses or perfumes, but of wax, wood, and faint musk. The air feels layered, as though scented by centuries of breath. You draw it in and sense both intimacy and heaviness. To breathe here is to inhale fragments of countless nights, each exhale lingering in the fibers of silk and the grains of wood. The chamber itself feels alive, as though it still expects footsteps and whispers before sleep. On a nearby table rests a small crucifix, its shadow stretching long across the silk. Religion was never far from the bedchamber, especially in the final hours of kings. Here, prayers blurred with sighs of fatigue, and absolution mingled with exhaustion. The cross is modest compared to the gilded splendor elsewhere, but in its simplicity lies weight. The flickering candle at its base makes the figure seem to nod in and out of view, a silent reminder that even sovereigns were subject to night's quiet reckonings. The more time you spend, the more the chamber seems to embrace you. It does not overwhelm. It enfolds. The hush thickens, wrapping gently like another layer of curtains. Even your breath slows, syncing with the quiet rhythm the room quietly encourages. There is no grandeur demanding notice, no spectacle calling for applause. Instead, the silk drapes and softened shadows invite stillness, a gentle surrender to rest. Each flicker of candlelight seems to whisper, coaxing your mind to release its tensions, allowing calm to seep in until you feel entirely cradled in the quiet intimacy of the space. You imagine what it would be to extinguish the last candle, to let darkness claim the chamber. Would the silence deepen, or would the past stir more vividly in the absence of light? Would the silk hold you safely, or suffocate with its weight of memory? You will not know tonight, for the flames still tremble, tracing their fragile halos against fabric. Yet you understand why this space mattered, not because it dazzled, but because it sheltered Dot as you prepare to leave. The curtains drift gently, offering a quiet, almost whispered farewell. The bed stands behind, grand yet strangely comforting, a silent anchor in the stillness. When the door clicks shut, the chamber's warm glow lingers in your eyes, the soft folds of silk merging with the shadowed corridor, carrying a sense of calm that trails with you. You carry with you the impression that even in a palace built for spectacle, the truest power was not always in mirrors or marble. Sometimes it was in the hushed rhythm of breath beneath silk drapes, the quiet surrender to night, the unspoken confessions that shadows alone witnessed. The gardens of the Petit Trianon rest in a kind of twilight that never quite leaves them. The hedges stand still, trimmed into elegant lines, yet softened by moonlight. Petals glisten with dew, as if each flower has been painted with a brush dipped in silver. You step onto the path, hearing the faint crunch of gravel beneath your feet, and notice how the air feels lighter here, freer than the grandeur of the palace. It is as though this garden has learned the art of keeping secrets, of holding whispers inside blossoms and shadows. This is where Marie Antoinette found her refuge. The queen, often trapped in rituals of court life, walked here to breathe without being observed. She did not need mirrors or chandeliers. She needed roses, lilacs, and the quiet rhythm of night insects. Beneath the canopy of leaves, she could almost become herself again, not a figure of ceremony, but a woman craving simplicity. History remembers her for extravagance, yet the garden tells a softer tale, one stitched with perfume and moonlight, rather than diamonds. It is also here, in the hushed corners of the Trianon, that rumors grew about her friendship with Axel von Fersen, the Swedish count who visited Versailles often. Some said he was merely a loyal confidant. Others whispered of affection that crossed into forbidden territory. The truth remains delicate, like the petals under your feet, fragile enough to vanish at a careless step. You might smile at the thought that even in the most gilded courts, human hearts still tangled themselves in the same knots of longing and secrecy. Among the archives today are the letters they exchanged. Some are ordinary, filled with words of support and loyalty, but others bear marks that still puzzle scholar sentences covered with ink. phrases carefully scratched out, passages replaced by code. The handwriting trembles between revelation and concealment, as though the pen itself could not decide whether to trust or to hide. These letters feel alive, like voices pressed into paper, still whispering across centuries. You imagine the queen walking the garden paths at night, perhaps carrying a folded page close to her chest. The stars above would watch silently, amused at the idea of royalty sneaking messages, as though they were love-struck students. A candle would flicker in her chamber later, illuminating each word as she read slowly, carefully, the way one sips strong tea, so it lasts longer. The secrecy was dangerous, but it was also a lifeline. In letters, she could step outside the weight of her crown and remember the pulse of being simply human. The scent of jasmine drifts across your senses as you wander farther. The blossoms open more fully at night, releasing perfume that lingers like soft laughter. If flowers could conspire, surely these did, cloaking the queen's hidden hours with fragrance. You picture her pausing here, fingers brushing the petals, listening not to courtiers, but to the song of crickets. In that pause, perhaps she whispered a name, perhaps she spoke nothing at all. Silence itself can be a confession when the heart is restless. The garden statues, pale under moonlight, seem to watch with steady patience. They have seen centuries of footsteps royal, secretive, forgotten. Their marble gazes do not judge, only witness. You feel them as companions, as if they too have guarded words not meant for public ears. Some historians still debate whether the affection between Antoinette and Fersen ever crossed into open love, or whether it remained the restrained longing of two souls bound by duty. The statues would know, but they remain loyal to silence. One path leads toward a small pavilion, its windows aglow with faint candlelight. The queen once hosted gatherings here, small enough to feel intimate, free from the rituals of court. Musicians would play, friends would laugh softly, and for a brief evening, the pressures of monarchy dissolved into something resembling ordinary life. Imagine her slipping away from laughter for a moment, stepping into the garden air, the coolness against her skin, reminding her of freedom she could never fully claim. There is tenderness in this thought, but also melancholy. The Trianon was built as her sanctuary, yet even sanctuaries cannot protect against rumor. A very privacy she sought fueled gossip, each flowerbed a canvas for speculation. Perhaps this is why her letters matter so deeply. They are fragments of voice, trembling with the effort to protect something fragile. In them we glimpse not just a queen, but a woman longing for understanding. You walk slowly past the fountains, their trickling water softened by the night air. The ripples reflect stars, shivering each time a breeze passes. In such reflections, truth itself seems uncertain, one moment sharp, the next blurred. It mirrors the way history remembers Marie Antoinette, extravagant or misunderstood, aloof or vulnerable. The water refuses to settle on one story, and perhaps that is the point. Human lives rarely fit neatly into a single version. At the edge of the path, you notice roses bending under their own bloom. Their petals scatter across the stone, creating a quiet carpet of red and white. You step gently, almost as if walking on fragments of memory. In some way, you are. The garden still carries her presence, not in grand monuments, but in these fleeting details, the scent of jasmine, the brush of silk, the hush of letters that never wish to be public. As you linger, the night deepens, and the garden grows more still. Every rustle of leaves, every faint murmur of hidden fountains, seems to carry a hush of secrets. You realize that secrecy itself has a sound here, delicate and almost alive. It is the sound of petals closing, of fountains whispering, of letters folded and hidden. It is the hush of Marie Antoinette's hidden hours, the delicate balance between what is known and what will forever remain veiled. You step away from the Trianon path slowly, sensing that history does not always dwell in marble halls or gilded mirrors. Sometimes it lingers in faded ink on fragile paper, in perfume that drifts softly through the night, or in the quiet, unspoken moments shared between two hearts. At night, the palace feels alive, as if its walls breathe. Marble softens, gilded doors lose their weight, and shadows cling protectively in corners. Candlelight flickers along corridors, lending the stillness a quiet expectancy. Somewhere within these timeless walls, secrets endure, the hidden rooms, the golden keys, and mysteries that have whispered softly through centuries. Keys have always been symbols of power. At Versailles, they were more than tools for locks. They were tokens of trust, privilege, and sometimes betrayal. A single golden key could grant access to chambers where whispers decided the fates of nations, or where more intimate secrets unfolded beneath velvet curtains. In the hands of a courtier, a key could mean advancement. In the hands of a rival, it could mean scandal. Even the act of wearing one, dangling at the waist, was a silent announcement of closeness to the royal circle. It is said that the Queen's household, particularly during the time of Marie Antoinette, revolved around a delicate ritual of keys. Those who served her closest were given keys to her private apartments, each key a badge of honor. Yet not all keys were accounted for. Stories tell of others gleaming, discreet, passed from hand to hand, that unlocked doors leading to rooms not listed on official maps. These were the golden keys of rumor, the ones whispered about but seldom seen. Like shadows of authority cast in metal, you pause at an ornate door framed with carved garlands. Imagine centuries ago, a lady-in-waiting pressing a golden key into the lock, the click echoing down the hall. Behind the door might have been a salon reserved for confidences, or perhaps a chamber of leisure hidden from prying eyes. The palace is vast enough to conceal such spaces. Even today, visitors often speak of stumbling upon staircases that lead somewhere unexpected. Versailles feels like a puzzle that never quite reveals all its pieces at once. The sound of keys has its own poetry. The faint metallic jingle in the folds of silk robes, the tiny scrape of teeth fitting into locks, a decisive turn that separates public corridors from private retreats. Imagine the Queen's steward walking at night, a ring of keys glinting at his side, each one carrying the weight of responsibility. A servant might dream of borrowing such a key, not for mischief, but for the chance to glimpse a world normally barred from view. To hold one was to hold a fragment of power, small but dazzling. Not every tale of golden keys was grounded in practicality. Some blossomed into legend. Whispers tell of a hidden chamber beneath the roof, holding sensitive documents, accessible only with a key rumored to be forged from pure gold. Others speak of a narrow door behind the hall of mirrors, a secret spine running through the palace. Whether fact or fancy, these stories endure because Versailles has always been as much about what remained unseen as what dazzled the eye. You might smile, thinking how today we hide passwords on phones, while then a gleaming golden key secured mysteries. Secrets, it seems, always crave locks, and locks always need a keeper. As you wander deeper, the corridor grows quieter, the kind of quiet that feels padded, like velvet laid across sound itself. You picture a courtier moving with cautious steps, golden key pressed warm against their palm. Perhaps it is late at night, after a supper by candlelight, when curiosity or longing urges them toward a forbidden door. The palace would seem to lean in, listening as the key slides into the lock. That tiny sound, the almost inaudible shift of tumblers, could carry the thrill of discovery or the dread of exposure. Marie Antoinette herself is said to have entrusted golden keys to her closest attendants, ensuring that only select hands could enter her private sanctuaries. Yet even then, rumors persisted of duplicates, copies fashioned in secret by those determined to slip through unseen. Whether these duplicates ever existed is uncertain, but the gossip was enough to feed imaginations. After all, what could be more tempting than a locked door in a palace built on desire and ambition? The candle flames tilt as you pass, casting wavering shapes across the walls. In their dance, you almost see the outline of doors that are no longer there, of rooms that perhaps once held laughter or tears, and then vanished into renovation. The palace has been altered, restored, polished again and again, but the idea of hidden chambers remains. It is less about bricks and mortar now, and more about the way history loves to conceal itself. You stop before another door, this one plain compared to the rest. Its simplicity is suspicious, like someone trying too hard not to be noticed. If you listen closely, you might imagine a faint echo, the metallic ring of a golden key turning centuries ago. That sound drifts forward in time, an echo still bouncing along marble corridors, searching for ears willing to hear. What makes the story of golden keys so soothing is not the thrill of scandal, but the reassurance that mysteries can exist even in places built for spectacle. Versailles was designed to dazzle with openness, to overwhelm the senses with light and splendor. Yet within that dazzle lay pockets of shadow, corners accessible only with the right key. It reminds you that even in the most public lives, there is always room for privacy, always a door that closes softly against the noise. You lean against the wall for a moment, feeling the cool marble steady you. The palace no longer feels like a monument, but like a confidant, sharing with you its half-kept secrets. The golden keys may be gone, their locks replaced or forgotten, but their echo lingers. It hums softly, a reminder that not everything needs to be known. Some mysteries are better left to shimmer in the silence, and so you continue your slow walk, content with the thought that every palace, every life, holds doors unopened. The key may be lost, but the imagination is enough to unlock the rest. The night deepens over Versailles, and the palace responds not with sleep, but with a gentler rhythm. Where sunlight once blazed across gilded ceilings, only candlelight now lingers. It shimmers along marble walls and spills across polished floors, softening every edge, lowering every voice. The corridors that by day feel vast and echoing are in this hour intimate. You walk them slowly, and it is as though the palace has folded in on itself, offering you a quieter version of its grandeur. Marble and flame are unlikely companions. One is cold, unyielding, carved from the earth. The other fragile, flickering, easily extinguished. Yet here they meet, and their union creates something remarkable. The pale stone absorbs the light, holds it for a moment, and then releases it in soft reflections that dance along the veined surfaces. Every ripple in the marble seems alive, as though the stone has learned to breathe with the flame. You notice the silence first, not an absence of sound, but the presence of stillness. The palace at night has its own vocabulary of hushes. The faint drip of melted wax, the distant shift of wooden beams, the soft sigh of a curtain stirred by air. Against this backdrop, every candle's flicker feels louder, its shadow play more insistent. You could stand here for hours, tracing how the flames sketch temporary paintings across the walls. Imagine the courtiers of long ago moving through these same corridors after a supper or an evening of music. Their satin shoes would whisper across the marble, their jewels catching and scattering bits of candlelight. Conversations hushed at night, reduced to murmurs and glances, as though the palace itself demanded discretion after dusk. A hallway might become not merely a path between rooms, but a stage for encounters planned, or accidental, each illuminated by nothing more than wavering flames. The chandeliers above you seem to float, clusters of crystal holding dozens of tiny suns. They sway almost imperceptibly, so that the hall shimmers with movement even when you stand still. The marble beneath reflects each glimmer, turning the floor into a dark mirror alive with shifting constellations. Walking forward feels like stepping through a galaxy that has descended to Earth, a universe shrunk down to the span of a corridor. Candles alter time. Their light is slower than electricity, slower than day. It invites you to linger, to move with deliberation. In the marble halls of Versailles, this slowness becomes almost sacred. You cannot rush when shadows slip so gracefully across the stone. You cannot hurry when every step threatens to disturb the delicate balance of flame and darkness. Candlelight teaches patience, and patience turns even a hallway into a sanctuary. History records countless evenings at Versailles when candlelight was more than decoration. It was power. The placement of candles at a banquet table might decide who was seen and who remained in the shadows. The illumination of a particular gallery could elevate a festival into legend. Even the act of carrying a single candle down the hall announced presence. A figure emerging from the dark, haloed in fragile light. To see someone by candlelight was to see them differently, softened, their edges blurred, their humanity made tender. You pause beside a column, running your hand lightly along its cool surface. The marble feels eternal, but the flame beside it trembles with every faint draft. Together they remind you that life is always both permanent and fleeting, carved in stone, yet gone in a breath. Perhaps that is why this moment feels so peaceful, because it holds both endurance and impermanence in a single scene. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the footsteps of a servant centuries ago, hurrying with a candelabrum to guide a guest through the labyrinthine corridors. The flames would sway wildly, stretching shadows across the walls like restless phantoms. Yet once the servant passed, the stillness returned, the marble reclaiming its calm. These halls have witnessed uncountable nights of motion and pause, of light carried forward and darkness restored. The longer you walk, the more you notice subtle details. The golden trim on a door catching a glint, the soft gleam of brass handles, a faint reflection of flame in a distant window pane. The palace does not sleep. It glows. Its glow is fragile but steady, a reminder that splendor can exist even in the quietest hours. For those who once walked these halls, the corridors were more than mere architecture. They were thresholds. Passing through them meant moving from the grandeur of court into the intimacy of private chambers, from politics into quiet reflection. Candlelight softened each transition, blurring lines between public and private. Even kings and queens, despite their power, seemed to yield to the gentle hush of night, allowing the warm, flickering glow to ease the weight of their authority. And now, centuries later, you find yourself moving in sync with this quiet rhythm. Each step is measured, deliberate, echoing the soft pulse of the flickering candlelight. The marble beneath your feet no longer commands awe. It feels like a companion, an old friend reflecting your calm. The candles, though small, seem eternal, each flame a link in a chain that has danced here through generations. You sense the weight of history softened by patience, and the palace no longer overwhelms, it embraces, inviting you to breathe slowly, to linger gently, and to become part of its enduring hush. You stop at the end of the hall and glance back. Behind you stretches a river of marble, golden ripples flowing where light meets stone. For a moment, you think the palace itself is exhaling, releasing the day's weight in a sigh of brightness and shadow. It is not grand speeches or ceremonies that linger now, but this the patient dance of flame and marble, silence and time. And as you turn away, you carry that image with you. A hall where stone and fire meet, where history walks beside you in hush and glow, and where the night itself seems lit from within. The palace has grown used to silence, but tonight the silence is given a companion. It arrives first as a whisper, too soft to notice unless you are listening carefully. Then, slowly, the sound swells, the steady patter of rain on the slate and tile roofs of Versailles. It is not a storm, not a violent intrusion, but a gentle descent, as if the sky itself has chosen to soothe the palace in sleep. The rooftops of Versailles are vast, stretching outward in perfect symmetry, a crown of stone and slate laid upon the head of a giant. During the day, they glimmer with sunlight. At dusk, they glow with a golden wash. But under rain, they change character. Water softens their edges, dulls their brilliance, and turns every tile into a small, resonant drum. The palace becomes an orchestra of surfaces slate, lead, copper, all playing a quiet percussion that seems to echo down into the halls. From within, you can hear it most clearly near the windows. The drops fall against glass with a rhythm that is both random and hypnotic, like fingers tapping on the edge of a dream. Curtains sway slightly with the draft, carrying with them the faint smell of wet earth drifting up from the gardens below. The air cools, and the warmth of candlelight seems to glow more fiercely in contrast, as though the palace itself is grateful for the rain's embrace. Step outside beneath one of the covered colonnades, and you can watch the rain without being touched by it. The marble columns frame the view of the courtyard, where puddles gather in perfect circles. Each drop expands the circle outward before vanishing into ripples, a pattern repeated countless times across the stone. The symmetry of Versailles extends even into these puddles, each one mirroring the vast geometry of the palace in miniature. Listen carefully, and you will notice layers to the sound. High above, rain taps against chimneys and statues. Little staccato bursts against carved stone. On the broad roofs, the drops fall in steady rhythm, creating a deeper murmur. In the courtyards, the splashes are sharp and playful, while gutters carry the water downward with gurgles and sighs. Together, these layers weave a fabric of sound so complete that you feel wrapped inside it, cocooned by the rain. The people of the court once feared rain, not for its beauty, but for its inconvenience. Fine silks and brocades were ruined by even the lightest drizzle. Carriages would splash mud along the roads leading to the palace. Outdoor spectacles, so beloved by the Sun King, were spoiled when the heavens opened. And yet, in quieter hours, perhaps even they paused to listen, recognizing that the rain lent Versailles something it could never produce on its own: humility. For all its grandeur, all its controlled gardens and sculpted fountains, the palace could not command the sky. Imagine Louis XIV himself, awake in his chambers, hearing rain scatter across the roof. Did he find it irritating, or did he listen as you do now, hearing the patter soften his palace into something human? Imagine a queen lying in bed, candle extinguished, listening to drops race down the window pane like messengers from some far-off land. Imagine a servant hurrying through the hall with a tray, pausing just for a heartbeat to watch the rain pool in the courtyard lantern light. In those moments, the rain belonged not to royalty or rank, but to everyone equally. Rain changes light as much as it changes sound. Lanterns flicker against wet stone, their glow multiplied in the shimmer of puddles. The gilded gates outside do not blaze with fire, but gleam softly, each droplet catching a glint as it slides down. Statues darken, their marble cloaks deepened by water, their faces streaked with reflective lines that seem like tears. The gardens blur at the edges, their precise lines softened by mist. Versailles, so famous for clarity and order, becomes impressionistic, a watercolor of stone and water. The longer the rain falls, the more you feel its rhythm sinking into you. Your breath adjusts, finding cadence with the drops. Your heartbeat slows to match the steady patter overhead. What once felt like a palace imposing, full of history and ceremony, now feels like a lullaby made of stone, tile, and sky. You wander to a gallery window. Beyond the glass, you see the rooftops shining, slick and dark, like great wings folded across the palace. Chimneys rise like sentinels, their edges blurred by drizzle. The gutters overflow, carrying small waterfalls into the hidden channels that feed the gardens. Each rivulet becomes part of a larger journey, destined to disappear into the soil that sustains the groves and flowers. Versailles is being quietly nourished, cleansed by the simplest of gifts. Perhaps this is why the palace seems to sigh tonight, its marble softened by water, its gilding subdued. Rain asks nothing of Versailles. It does not admire, it does not obey, it does not judge. It simply falls, steady and impartial. And in that impartiality lies its gift, to remind the palace and those who walk within it of the gentleness that exists outside grandeur. The hour grows late. The rain does not tire, but your body feels its invitation to rest. You close your eyes and let the rhythm of droplets wash over you. They tap against glass, slide down roofs, gather in hidden places, and all the while create a harmony that is both ancient and endlessly new. The rain has no beginning and no end. It is only a cycle, a whisper of sky touching earth. And so Versailles, wrapped in the gentle rhythm of falling rain, softens in ways unseen by daylight. Its grand halls hum with faint echoes, carrying the memory of centuries, while gardens drink deeply, leaves and flowers glistening under the silver moonlight. The rooftops shimmer softly, reflecting droplets like tiny stars. Tonight, the palace is no longer a symbol of kings and queens, of power and ceremony. It simply listens to the rain, quietly, patiently, just as you do, sharing with you a fleeting, serene moment of presence and calm. The rain has softened to a faint drizzle, and inside the palace the air feels freshly washed, as though even the walls have taken a deep breath. You find yourself drawn away from the grand salons and toward a quieter corridor, a place where fewer feet wander, where shadows linger a little longer. Here, the gallery of portraits waits an archive of faces whose stories are more whispered than remembered. The corridor is dim, lit by only a handful of candles whose flames waver in the draught. Along the walls, gilt frames stretch from one end to the other, each holding the likeness of a woman who once held influence in Versailles. Their names are written on small plaques, yet the paint has dulled, and some letters are barely visible. These were the mistresses, companions, and confidants of kings, yet centuries have blurred their features, leaving them to gaze out from the canvas with eyes softened by time. You pause before one portrait. The woman wears pearls at her neck, her hair styled high, powdered and adorned with ribbons. Her expression is neither joyful nor sorrowful, but balanced somewhere in between, as though aware of the delicate game she once played at court. Perhaps she is Louise de la Vallière, remembered for her retreat to a convent, or perhaps another whose devotion never made it to the chronicles. Whoever she is, her eyes seem to follow you, asking for recognition that history has denied. Further along, another face emerges from shadow. This one is painted with a bold hand, her gown rich with crimson folds, her smile faintly mischievous. The label suggests it may be Madame de Montespan, the once glorious favorite whose influence touched even matters of state. And yet, here she hangs in silence, her vibrant power reduced to brushstrokes and varnish. You wonder if she would laugh at the irony, that the palace she once dominated now hosts her in stillness, her legacy preserved not in whispers of poison or scandal, but in the simple act of being looked at. The candlelight shifts, and you notice something peculiar. On some canvases, the paint has cracked into fine lines, giving the illusion of tears streaming down painted cheeks. Others are faded at the edges, as though the women themselves are withdrawing into shadow, reluctant to be remembered too clearly. You realize that time has been painting over them in its own way, laying down strokes of dust, fading the vibrancy of their gowns, softening the precision of their features. The gallery is not only an archive, but also a graveyard of colors. Walk a little further, and you come upon Madame de Pompadour's likeness. Her portrait is softer than the others, her eyes turned slightly away, holding a book rather than a jewel. She is remembered as the patroness of the arts, a woman who guided Louis XV with intelligence as much as charm. Yet here, she is motionless, caught forever in a moment of quiet contemplation. You can almost imagine her rising from the frame, setting down her book, and reminding you that Versailles was as much shaped by her intellect as by the architects who built its walls. Near the end of the corridor, another face appears, this one, unmistakably Marie Antoinette. Unlike the others, her image is brighter, painted with the extravagance of her era. Pearls, silks, flowers all surround her. And yet, knowing her fate, the portrait feels like a veil hiding sorrow. Her painted smile is fragile, her eyes too wide. You wonder if the painter saw her fear, or if he, too, was forced to paint only what the court demanded, an icon, not a woman. There is something haunting in this walk among portraits. Each face once commanded attention, once walked through gilded halls and held conversations that shaped lives. Now their voices are gone, their influence reduced to pigment and canvas. Yet, in their silence, there is a dignity. They no longer need to perform, to intrigue, to charm, or to scheme. They are free to simply be remembered, however faintly dot as you move slowly down the gallery. The candle flames cast shadows that ripple across the paintings. At times, the shadows make it seem as though a figure has turned her head slightly, or her lips have curved into a different expression. It is easy to imagine that the women are whispering among themselves, sharing secrets that the walls will never betray. Perhaps they talk of their joys, perhaps of betrayals, or perhaps they simply gossip about who receives the most attention from wandering visitors like you. The rain outside has softened to a mere whisper against the windows. The palace is draped in layers of quiet, the muted presence of the portraits, the gentle echo of footsteps on marble, the low flicker of candlelight. It feels like a chamber of echoes, where history does not shout but murmur softly, flowing through each brushstroke and layer of varnish, inviting you to listen with patience and care. You pause one last time before leaving the corridor. Dozens of faces gaze back at you, some proud, some wistful, some enigmatic. Each one represents a life of ambition, of love, of loss. Each one was once as vivid as your own reflection in a mirror. Now they remain only in paint, their identities blurred, their secrets safe. And yet you realize the portraits have not been completely forgotten. Tonight you have walked among them, felt their silent presence, honored their watchful gaze, and allowed them to breathe once more, if only for a fleeting moment, a quiet connection bridging past and present in the stillness of the palace dot as you turn to leave. The corridor stretches behind you, a quiet gallery of women who once walked these halls and shaped the rhythm of Versailles. Their painted eyes seem to follow you, glinting softly in the flicker of candlelight, not with judgment, but with gentle acknowledgement. Each portrait holds a story, a life lived in whispered conversations, hidden letters, and fleeting moments of power and vulnerability. Though centuries have passed, the presence of these women lingers, folding around the walls like a velvet echo. You feel their subtle gaze, a reminder that history remembers even the quietest footsteps. The palace begins to quiet in a way that feels almost ceremonial, as if Versailles itself knows when it is time to sleep. You find yourself in one of the grand salons, though the splendor of the day has softened into something gentler. The chandeliers still hang in perfect symmetry above you, but their brilliance is subdued, each crystal reflecting only the smallest flicker of candlelight dot along the tall windows. Heavy velvet curtains begin to draw closed. Their fabric is deep in color crimson in some rooms, royal blue in others, and they move slowly, as if reluctant to surrender the last glances of the night. You notice how the folds fall with grace, creating shadows that gather at the edges of the room. These curtains, once pulled aside for monarchs to survey their gardens or for courtiers to watch approaching carriages, now serve a different role. They cradle the palace in stillness dot as the velvet slides shut. The world outside disappears. No gardens, no fountains, no distant torches. just the cocoon of the palace, held gently in the dark. The air inside feels warmer without the drafts from open windows, as though the building itself has wrapped a blanket around its shoulders. You breathe more slowly, matching the hush that has settled into every corner. You think of how many times this same ritual must have played out. Servants pulling the curtains at dusk, ensuring that the sovereign's chambers were sealed from the chill. Musicians packing away their instruments. Courtiers stepping quietly down polished corridors, their voices lowered after a long day of spectacle. In a place as grand as Versailles, even bedtime carried the weight of ceremony. A faint scent of beeswax and velvet fibers rises as the fabric brushes against itself. It is oddly soothing, the kind of detail you would never notice in daylight, but which seems important in the intimacy of night. You find yourself smiling at the thought. Even the curtains, heavy and luxurious, seem to sigh in relief as they are drawn shut, happy to rest from holding back the sundot in one chamber. The curtains are so thick that no light escapes at all. The room feels like a velvet-lined box, secure and timeless. In another, the candlelight sneaks through the edges, painting thin lines of gold against the dark folds. Each variation gives the rooms their own mood, some secretive, some tender, all preparing for the silence ahead. You pause to imagine the lives once sheltered behind these curtains. Kings drifting into uneasy dreams, queens pressing letters against their hearts before sleep, mistresses lying awake, wondering what the morning would bring. Behind each drawn curtain, there was a private world, shielded from the constant gaze of the court. For all the grandeur of Versailles, these moments of enclosure must have been the rare times when its inhabitants could feel a hint of solitude. Soundscape shifts as the curtains close. The echo of the marble halls grows softer, muffled by fabric. The rattle of the windows against the winds disappears. What remains is the faintest hum of the building itself, wood settling, wax dripping, air moving gently through the corridors. It is not silence in the sense of emptiness, but silence as a companion, patient and kind. You imagine walking from chamber to chamber, each one cloaked in velvet, each one offering a different shade of quiet. Some rooms feel contemplative, as if encouraging you to read by candlelight until sleep claims you. Others are purely restful, their darkness so complete that even thought seems unnecessary. The palace, once a place of constant display, now becomes a sanctuary of rest. It strikes you that this act of closing curtains is almost like closing the eyes of the palace itself. Just as you lower your eyelids at the end of the day, Versailles lowers its velvet shades. The comparison makes you chuckle softly after all. Who knew that a building could mirror the simple rhythm of human rest? As you move further, you pass one last grand set of curtains in the king's chamber. They are immense, their fabric embroidered with golden threads that catch the light even in near darkness. When they meet in the middle, the entire room changes character. What was once a stage for royal grandeur becomes an intimate cocoon. The king, whether Louis XIV basking in absolute power or Louis XVI weighed down by doubt, would have experienced the same enveloping quiet. Behind the curtains, the crown was momentarily set aside, and the human being could simply breathe. Walking slowly down the hall, you let your fingertips brush against the velvet. The fabric is smooth, almost liquid in its softness, with a weight that grounds you. Touching it feels like leaning into comfort itself, as though centuries of dreams have been woven into the threads. Perhaps in a way they have. After all, how many nights did Versailles cradle its residents in this very darkness? At last, the palace is sealed in stillness. No garden view remains, no moonlight filters through. The velvet curtains have done their work, closing not just the windows, but the day itself. The grand drama of Versailles has ended for now, leaving behind only the softer poetry of rest. You breathe deeply and let your shoulders drop, knowing that the same stillness that once soothed kings and queens now belongs to you. The curtains close for them, and for you as well, inviting you into the same timeless rhythm of sleep that has passed through these halls for centuries. The palace does not resist your presence. Instead, it seems to settle alongside you, its grand corridors softening, its velvet-adorned rooms lowering their eyelids in unspoken rest. Each echo, each shadow, each flicker of candlelight slows, harmonizing with the rhythm of your own breath. In this gentle alignment, the weight of history fades, leaving only a profound, tender stillness. The grandeur remains, yet it no longer overwhelms. What lingers is the simple, intimate quiet of night, a quiet that is both vast and personal, wrapping around you like a familiar, comforting cloak of serenity. The Palace of Versailles, once the vibrant heart of a kingdom, now breathes in a quieter, more deliberate rhythm. No longer a court alive with the constant pulse of politics, ceremony, and intrigue. It stands as a monument grand, luminous yet profoundly intimate in its memory. The gilded halls, once filled with monarchs, ministers, and courtiers, now echo with the gentle footfalls of visitors, their presence faintly brushing against centuries of history, as though stepping into a dream carefully preserved. The weight of authority has lifted, but the palace carries its past in every wall, every corridor, every whisper of the air. History has shifted. The revolution stripped Versailles of its role as the beating heart of royal authority, and the palace, once thrumming with ceremony and governance, entered a quieter, more reflective existence. Its grand courtyards, which had once resounded with the thunder of carriage wheels, the synchronized march of royal guards, and the lively chatter of courtiers, now lie in a hushed stillness, as if the very stones remember each footstep, but no longer demand attention. The vast apartments, once alive with orchestras performing for masked balls and ceremonial feasts, now hold only the faintest echoes of music and laughter, soft traces of life that no longer commands the senses. Rooms that once dictated the pace of empires now exist under their own rhythm, free from the rigid cadence of royal expectation. Time itself, which had obediently bent to the will of Louis XIV, the Sun King, now wanders freely, stretching across halls lined with gilded moldings and crystal chandeliers, lingering in the corners where courtiers once whispered, pausing over staircases where kings once ascended with measured dignity. Even absent the pomp, Versailles retains the memory of its past, a testament to lives lived in grandeur and secrecy, echoing faintly in every silent hall, corridor, and chamber. Yet the silence here is never empty. It is dense with echoes of music, drifting faintly through halls, candlelight flickering across gilded moldings, the rustle of velvet gowns as courtiers once crossed marble floors. Some claim that, in the stillest hours, shadows linger. Visitors who wander the gardens late at night report fleeting glimpses of figures that vanish as quickly as they appear. A powdered wig disappearing between trimmed hedges, a gown sweeping past a fountain, laughter faint and elusive, as though carried from another century. Imagination or memory, it hardly matters. The palace seems determined to preserve its past, to allow it to breathe alongside the present. The gardens of Versailles, especially under the cloak of night, reveal a quiet, delicate mystery. By day, their precision is striking mathematical symmetry, stretching across lawns, fountains, and hedges, a testament to order and control. Yet as twilight deepens, mist curls along the paths, moonlight brushes treetops, and the geometry softens. Hedges blur into gentle silhouettes, fountains glimmer like liquid silver, and statues stand sentinel, their carved faces softened by shadow. In this hushed, silvered world, it feels as if the past moves silently among the trees, brushing lightly against the present, leaving only whispers of its presence. The very air seems alive with memory. Damp earth mingles with the faint perfume of closing flowers, while a gentle breeze threads through the alleys, stirring leaves and hinting at secrets unseen. Perhaps it is only wind, or perhaps Versailles itself exhales, revealing fragments of stories kept safe for centuries. As you approach the Grand Canal, its waters mirror the night sky, smooth and reflective. In earlier times, Louis XIV staged magnificent spectacles here, boats gliding across the water, fireworks igniting the darkness, music filling the gardens. Now the canal lies in still silver tranquility, a ribbon of quiet stretched into the mist. The performances have long ended, but the water seems to remember them, as though holding the memory of human laughter and orchestral melodies. Beneath its surface, memory repeats itself in subtle ways as you wander. Versailles remembers its kings, its queens, its mistresses, its ministers. It recalls triumph and loss, the glitter of royal festivities, and the grief of vanished empires. Though the palace no longer commands kingdoms, it commands something perhaps more enduring, a sense of timelessness, the capacity to cradle stories long after their actors have disappeared. The final candles gutter, their flames quivering before fading into smoke. Moonlight lingers, soft and forgiving, draping halls and gardens in gentle silver. In this quiet glow, Versailles sheds its grandeur and intrigue, becoming a sanctuary. History exhales softly, time slows, and echoes of the past transform into a lullaby, inviting anyone wandering here to pause, breathe, and rest within the serene, tender embrace of memory. Now the palace rests. Its velvet curtains are drawn, its marble halls quiet, its fountains asleep beneath the mist. The great drama has ended for the night, leaving only stillness. Versailles exhales gently, as though the centuries themselves are sighing, content to pause. You walk slowly, listening not for voices or music, but for the soft hush that blankets everything. The air feels cool, tender on your skin. The gardens no longer dazzle, they soothe, their paths softened by dew. The statues keep their silent watch, their faces calm, their gazes unhurried. Even the great canal seems to sleep, its waters holding the stars in a peaceful embrace. Perhaps in this quiet, the ghosts are not frightening but kind. They are memories, drifting softly like the mist companions rather than intruders. A gown brushing the grass, a whisper lost in the leaves, a candle flickering one last time. They mean no harm. They are part of the dream, a gentle reminder that history itself can rest out as the final lights fade. The palace is given over tonight. No power, no intrigue, no endless display, only peace. Versailles, wrapped in its own silence, offers you the same invitation to close your eyes, to let go of the day, to drift. And so, with the last whisper of the palace lingering in your heart, you breathe deeply. The story closes like velvet curtains, soft and slow. Sleep well. Good night.